you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, brought to you by Trulytics by Envestnet. This week on the show, I have Ryan George, Chief Marketing Officer of Docupace, with me for a wide-ranging conversation about things like how RIAs and independent financial advisors who are transitioning their business can automate the repapering process and transition 90% of their clients within 60 days. I know, right? That's amazing. And Ryan also shares the top 5 signs your business has a productivity issue and what you can do to fix those things. It's a fantastic episode. You're absolutely going to love it. Okay, as always, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like the podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a guest or a topic, hit us up. Simply go to Trulytics.com and use that little contact form there, or shoot us an email, podcast@Trulytics.com. Okay, let's get to our chat with Ryan George. Well, Ryan George, welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. So wonderful to see you today.
Wonderful to see you. This is the highlight of my day, my week, and maybe my month. This is great, Mike.
Finally somebody recognizes that, it should be the highlight. We get to hang out together, see each other face to face. Awesome stuff. Plus, we're in the same time zone, in the same state, right up 35. It's great.
That helps. That makes things easier. We can get closer, speak, text, and to each other.
I know, exactly. It's really funny. So I just recorded a podcast earlier today with somebody who was recently in Vietnam, and we were actually going to be recording a podcast while he was in Vietnam. And I was a little bummed out when he canceled because he couldn't figure out how to make the time work very well, because I've actually recorded podcasts with people in Australia, Hong Kong, Europe, and so forth. And I was kind of hoping I could have, check Vietnam off the list, but it didn't work out well. So you'll have to.
I did recently speak with someone at the Republic of Georgia, which was a new one for me.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. This is amazing. So anyway, enough of our geography stuff. I'm really excited to have you on the show, buddy. I'm so thrilled that your team reached out to talk about getting you on the show, because what you and the team are working on at Docupace is really relevant for our audience, the Modern Financial Advisor audience. And I thought we frankly kick things off with a bang today. This show's origin and frankly, the origins of Trulytics, who we produced the show for, is all about advisor transitions, right? I started out, as a valuations calculator, and really started talking about advisors who are looking to sell or buy another business or some other form of transition, whether it's succession or so forth. And frankly, the name of this podcast was almost a transitions podcast. And then we ended up calling it valuations. And then we transitioned it to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. So as you might imagine, we've talked about this topic a lot. But frankly, it's always been from that strategic level, right? Of, okay, how should you think about transitioning out of your business and so forth? Who should you sell to? How should you be ready to sell your business? What's the valuation look like? Blah, 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 all that type of stuff. But today we're going to go a lot deeper, I think, because during our prep call, you mentioned that you and your team have a solution that automates the repapering process. And that has some huge benefits for the advisor. So let's dive in there.
Absolutely. So in our transitions program, we like to say, because it's a team, not directly a tool. So it's both, a technology and a human being that are combined together.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest benefit is we all know that there's, likely thousands upon thousands of advisors out there who are unhappy with where they are today. They're unhappy with the wealth management provider that they're currently affiliated with or who they're working with. And the reason that they don't do anything about it is that they feel trapped. They feel like the cost of transitioning is going to be so much work. It's going to disrupt their business so much that they just don't want to do it. And what Docupace has done, and we've started it way back in 2017, is trying to make that process as easy and as painless as possible. So since 2017, we've transitioned about 1,500 or more advisors' book of business. And that includes over 500,000, almost 600,000 client accounts. And what in the business we call repapering, or getting a client to get to the new custodian, the new provider. But here's the big thing. The big thing is 93% of those clients are transitions within 60 days. So we take that pain point, which can be a 6-8 month long process, and we can shrink it down to having it mostly done within 2 months. The reason that it's not 100% in 60 days is a lot of times during the transition, the advisors decide, there's clients they don't want to work with anymore. There's clients
Mm.
that they want to actively leave behind, and that's why that number isn't 100.
You know, it's really interesting to me. A couple of things pop into my mind when I think about the repapering process and how big of an impact this has for financial advisors, particularly those who are thinking about selling or buying a business. One of the things that we've seen over the years is many advisors only want to sell their business or buy a business that's using the same broker dealer,
Yep. So
in
they don't have to
part
repaper.
the repapering process. So
Yep.
this has a huge opportunity for those advisors to like become, I guess, broker dealer agnostic, right?
It does. We like to think it as broker, could be broker dealer agnostic as well as custodian agnostic with Docupace. And I think one of the things that's always worth pointing out whenever we talk about transitions is the core of the solution, and at the heart of what makes it so powerful is the transitions team that we have in Des Moines that holds the hand of the advisor
Mm.
through the biggest change they're likely ever going to do with their business, and make sure that they understand that here are the steps that need to be taken. Here's the sequence, very critical. Here's a sequence that's needed in order to follow to remain compliant. But also, just to be a sounding board through this transition process where the advisor can sort of be in between, the business that they were before and sort of where they're going tomorrow.
Yeah. And I imagine the other big thing is you mentioned it's a 93% retention rate. And most of these are or 93% are done within 60 days, right? And there's a very,
Yes.
very high retention rate. I might have
Correct.
butchered the number on the retention rate, but I imagine that retention rate that's also a big anxiety factor for advisors under the transition process if they're thinking about changing broker dealers, whether it's just, hey, we're keeping our business and we're just changing broker dealers, or we're selling the business and we're going to be
Yeah.
moving over. There's an anxiety that like maybe some of my clients, once I put a stack of papers in front of them that they have to sign, hey, if I'm going to sign these papers, maybe I should start thinking about some things, right?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you go through a transition, I think with a business, there's risk, some level of risk within the system,
Sure.
right? So if you think about, having to repaper the account, it gives the client an opportunity to think, should I have a different advisor, or should I
Right.
have a different provider?
Yeah.
And I think by making it seamless, making the experience quick and painless, I think those are all ways to help mitigate that risk when, mostly the advisor, look, advisors don't do much without the best interest of their clients in mind.
For sure.
And I think they wouldn't be choosing any provider if they didn't think it would be beneficial to their clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm a big fan of, you've probably heard me say this many times on this show. Anytime I can remove friction from the process, it's like, let me get the friction out, smooth this process. It just makes life a lot easier. And anytime something slows down, I don't know about you, I start getting annoyed and frustrated and worried about things. And so like, let's just smooth this process out. Um, why do you think that we still have so much freaking paper in this industry?
So, so I'm going to put on my FDR hat and say, paper will endure as it has endured. It's one of those things. I think people just get used to tangible things, and I'll equate it to currency. So
Yeah.
there's paper in this business because we're talking about money, and people have a tendency to want to hold it in their hand when they do so, when they're making a transaction or when
Yeah.
they're making an investment. There is no real reason for it. There's no reason that we need to take a document, put in information, zoom, put that information in a digital
Yeah.
format, send that information around. Like the paper should be irrelevant, but yet it still endures, as I mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It is kind of funny. I mean, there'll always be some people who want to have that tangible feeling to it, but I think most of us, I mean, man, I always tell people go to the airport. Just next time you're in an airport or any other large public setting, and just look around you. Look at how many people, regardless of demographic, whether that's age, gender, racial, whatever you want, just look at everybody. They're looking at their phone, they're looking at a laptop or whatever. Very few today are looking at some sort of physical paper thing, right? Some people might be reading a book, but that tells you where the world is heading or is,
Sure.
frankly. And so you definitely want to be getting people off
Yeah.
the old dead tree model for your business.
Yeah, well, I think part of it too is there's still we're still overly reliant on the ink signature
Sure.
to be the validation that this is Mike actually signing. And I think we're still sort of in the early days of that.
Yeah.
That's sort of the idea that like my finger going across the screen is the same validation that a pen going across a piece of paper would. And I think it's taken longer than I thought it would, but it's still, to me, it's very impressive.
So this is an interesting one, an interesting question that you just made me think of, and I didn't even think about this in prep for the show. But I would imagine it's much more provable, if you want to call it, or strong to have a digital signature than a paper ink signature from the perspective of like I can prove that it was at least your device in use when this thing was signed, right? Versus a piece of paper. Like if I mail in a piece of paper that was signed, it's like, how do I know if this was you that signed it, right?
Well, it's odd. I mean, so we have to your exact point, we have a compliance piece of the Docupace platform that's called the Compliance Tracker. And what that is a way to digitally deliver Form CRS, Form 80V, or their regulatory required documents to the client so the client can attest that they've received it. And the biggest benefit of that is not only does the client get to receive the materials and have them, into perpetuity in a digital format, but also when a regulator comes in and says, I want to know every client that you signed on from between June last year and October, it's auditable. So you can hit a
Mm,
button and you can pull it up and you know exactly what time of day, what day, what device that the client did so. And I think that that's pretty critical because
yeah,
if I just was to sign a piece of paper, sometimes people put a date on it, sometimes people don't, but that's not auditable
right.
in an easy way.
Well, and look, kids have been forging their parents' signatures forever, and I don't that's I don't think that's very likely in this industry. But I guess the point I was trying to make there is, um, from a trustability factor, right? Digital signatures. I think for a while people were a little bit hesitant because like, is it trustworthy or whatever? How can I verify it's you? It's like, well, how did you verify that the signature on the application was the person in the first place? They weren't like when I open up an application to work with an advisor, I don't have to go get it notarized. I just sign it and hand it or sign it and mail it. How is that any more valid than a digital signature, especially when I couple in the fact that you just said some of the authentication components, and heck, I can probably track it down to location, like I know it came from your house. Type
Yeah,
of thing.
and there are some. I mean, and the industry still does follow stuff like signature guarantees or notaries when you're receiving money. So if you're
Right.
trying to, pull money out versus put money in, but it is. I just think it's something deeply inside our lizard brain where
Yeah.
we grew up that way. It would be interesting to ask a younger person if they have that same attachment. And I'm not sure if they would.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, heck, I wouldn't consider myself. I feel young, but I don't think I'm considered a younger person anymore. And I'd much rather be digitally signing everything.
Yeah,
It's a total pain in the
sure.
butt. The,
It's storing the documents, so I
yeah.
don't have to go locate them. I can just search for tax documents,
Yeah.
and it comes up.
Well, it's funny, and I know we're spending a little bit more time on this than people might have thought, but like, I think it's really important because we're not too far removed from like digital signatures being a brand new thing, right? It's only a decade or so old since we started using this, and I think it's worth talking about because I think many advisors, and we hear this all the time. The average age for a financial advisor is 62 years old. Okay, well, I bet you a healthy amount of our audience is still doing things on paper, and we're trying to move away from that for a lot of really important reasons: timeliness, ease of use, uh, maybe verifying if necessary. But as you think about the process you've gone through so far with DocuPace and where you are today, what's been the most difficult piece of getting the end-to-end digitization process of paperwork done?
Sure. Sure. I think there's a couple of things that I think are headwinds to adoption, put it that way.
Mm,
One of them being the humans. So what we
yeah.
just talked about, do humans take the time to learn the technology and actually put their practices and modify their processes or modify their behaviors in order to effectively use the tool? So that's one thing. As most technologies do, we try to put in place sort of the ramp up start time so that we know once you launch it and you can get people in it and actually using it, then they will continue to use it versus if they're not in it, they're not going to use it. That's one. I think another headwind is the connectivity and sort
Mm,
of the integration aspect of different technologies today. I think if you used to think back to how this business used to run, it was on sort of like a mainframe closed system where
mm,
everything that an advisor or bank teller or whoever could do was all sort of on the system. And that's no longer the way things are. So you need to be able to integrate with different tools in order to make them work. And I think that's very critical.
I'm glad you brought that up because there is in it's there probably still is a lot of legacy software out there. I mean, look, if it
Oh my
ain't broke,
gosh.
don't fix it is kind of one of the ways that we all work with it.
Yeah.
And if you've been using a certain solution for 20, 30 years, and it's like, hey, yeah, the solution gets updated from time to time, but hey, this thing just works. I've learned this. I'm an expert at this type of thing. And at some point in time, most advisors get to a point where they have plateaued in their business. They've grown to a certain point where they've got a really healthy uh, book of clients, client roster, and they might take on onesie twosies here, new clients, but as a general rule, they stop growing. That's just the reality of the world. And once you reach that plateau in your business, you kind of stop not always thinking about innovating, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love my grandfather. My grandfather actually got me my first job in this business. Um, I had the pleasure of actually working alongside him. He was the maintenance man for the building, but at least I got to see him every day. I got to see him and interacting with people. It was very cool. But one of the things I always thought was, at what age do you stop buying clothes for yourself? Because you see these older people that say like, oh well, that's a 20-year-old shirt. That person must be about 90 or so. So it's very similar with technologies. The people who are in that way and trying to remain current will continue to do so, but the others will get left behind. I'm afraid probably going to get left behind pretty quickly,
Yeah.
faster than they may think.
First of all, I love the fact that you just brought up the whole like, what point do you stop buying clothes for yourself? Um,
It's
because
the first time you hear that on a technology podcast, I
well, no, I
promise.
love it. I love the fact that you bring it up because like everybody, I bet you everybody listening to or watching this episode of the show is like, I've got a shirt or two in my closet or whatever that I've had that thing for way too long. It's probably time I retired it or whatever. And which also thanks a lot. I've got to go buy new clothes this weekend, apparently. But I think that,
The gift cards in the mail.
but it's so true. It's funny, especially when you have teenagers, as I do. You will all of a sudden, from a technology perspective, you will suddenly realize that like it is easier to say, "Hey, can you do this?" Because they're faster or better at a certain thing than you are, and it happens in an instant. You're like, I was a technology expert, and all of a sudden, you realize your kid's way smarter and faster than you are at it. Like, give me your
Yeah,
phone, and they and do it. And you have to actively say, "No, I need to know how to do that. I can't just let you do it for me because someday you're going to be off in college, and then I'm going to be what, not knowing how to fix my phone or whatever it is." You
sure,
just
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there is definitely a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I used to tease my father-in-law, listen, man, like you're gonna have to learn how to change the clock on this VCR thing back in when VCRs, right? Because I'm not always
The
gonna be
blink, the
over it.
blinking 12,
I'd
the
come to the
blinking
house,
12.
yeah.
Just
He would have made a decision. This is kind of funny. He would love this story. We'd come to the house and he'd be like, "Hey, Mike, I need you for a minute." Like what? He's like, "I decided to move the TV and cable box and VCR from this place over to this room." He'd have this little TV that he'd watch his shows on, whatever. I can't get this to work. And he like, why didn't you pay attention to how the cables went in and are out? Like, okay, I'll get you set up again. Please stop moving stuff, that type of thing. But no, it is true. I think we all do eventually reach a comfort level that we have to overcome. And listen, this is a great bridge for our next conversation because I want to switch gears away from from the digital documents and so forth, digital paperwork, if you will, to productivity a little bit deeper because I seem to say this in every single episode, but listen, I guess this is the first principle, right? We all have first principles in the world. The majority of RIAs are small businesses, like really small businesses. Like if you look at the average RIA firm, most have fewer than 5 advisors on their team. And it's like an overwhelming majority have fewer than 5 advisors. And so these are small teams. Even if they're managing a couple of $1 billion of AUM, it's relatively few people doing that managing. So when it comes to concepts like operations and focusing on improving productivity, many of these RIAs are a bit stuck. I mean, because like that's not their focus. And they became a financial advisor. They know how to be great financial advisors and not necessarily great business people by per se or great entrepreneurs, right? But you've got this new solution, or I'm not actually sure how new it is. You'll tell me. It's a solution called RIA Productivity Suite. Take us through like
yes,
how it works and the problems it solves for RIAs.
sure. So I mean, RAs aren't alone. They're not the only ones who suffer from, productivity gaps, but they learn how to function, right? So
Mm,
if you look at like sort of the growth trajectory of how many RA firms are exactly like you described. So smaller shop, a handful of people, but as some have wanted to grow and sought to grow, they start ramping up. And when you wear or get used to and actually get effective at wearing so many hats, the challenge is as you grow, as every piece of the pie grows with it,
yeah.
you no longer can be effective as you do so, right? So like it's a very sort of ceiling that you're creating, self ceiling that you're creating for yourself. So that's what you're seeing a lot as the RA market. We're going on probably 10 years of being a very bull market in the RA space in terms of that's where the growth in the whole industry is going. You sort of have these bumpers that have sort of prevented productivity from happening. So I think if you look at, I mean, I've got dozens of surveys that show from different sources all over the industry about advisors wanting to be more productive. And so what the productivity suite, which you're all right, it's a new product for us. We released it in December of last year, specifically for RAs, is trying to take the productivity gains some of the have historically sort of sat locked in the large enterprises and be able to deliver them to a smaller firm like an RA firm that they can benefit the same way. So they can unlock growth, not have to be overly burdened with a lot of full-time employees if they want to bring on more clients and sort of make that more possible. And so I think that's the root cause of the firm. And I think there's sort of six things. I'll break it down into two camps, right? So let's start with the two biggest things that Productivity Suite is here to do is improve the customer experience, so
Mhm.
CX, and then enhance the employee experience, the EX. So that's on sort of the first side of that is making sure that things are more digital, more efficient, can actually optimize, and people can understand where they are in the process, and also they don't have to retouch or rekey things or
Right.
just all the things we're talking about. We don't have to shuffle paper around. On the employee side, I think you know attracting talent is really critical to having a modern experience. Like think of when I first got in this business, I was asked, as a rep, I was asked to go pull account history. I had to go to three different technologies. I had to go to the current system, one a system that was now has been decommissioned, and also microfiche. That tells you how old I am. That I actually had to go and pull the microfiche system out.
Yeah.
But that would not be a situation that today's new entrants in the market or whatever want to accept. Right? That's
Yeah.
not the process that they think is effective. So that's a long-winded way of saying you could leverage technology to be more efficient in your business, be able to serve more clients.
Yeah. It's so true. Uh you don't think about how much time is wasted in doing some basic routine things, right? Pull account history. Great example of that. Well, when was the account opened? To your point, if this account was opened 20 years ago, it might not be on your current system. You might have to
Yes.
go way back and ask for some help. You know,
And we're talking about universal problems. So I looked at there's a FactSet survey about sort of digital transformation and within RA firms. So the top performers, showed like different areas like digital experience and uh, portfolio trading, in other analysis like data analytics, like Truelytics would be like how many have adopted them, and of course. All of the top performers had adopted more of the technology's capabilities than the rest of the field, right? That's what made them top performers. What's interesting, though, is the biggest gap between high performers in the field
mm,
is in optimizing workflows and back office. And there's the largest gap, which is very interesting to me because it's like if you want to differentiate yourself, there's a way to do so.
yeah,
However, it also had the smallest amount of top performers in the percentage as well. There's only 80%, whereas like 97 have done CRM or 99 have done CRM.
yeah.
So it's just interesting that it's still very much greenfield, and why we're so excited about the business ahead of us because we think we can transform how a lot of the people that are doing the rough work today, and we can transform their day-to-day business.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because this is such an important conversation to be having, even though I'm not sure this is the top of mind for most RIAs and most individual advisors is, hey, look, you likely could be serving more clients or frankly just have more time if you could find a way to stop spending so much time on things that are you know, more cumbersome than necessary, right? I mean, we get to productivity. It's
Absolutely.
not just productivity to me is not just output per person necessarily, right? It's output per hour of or right or output per the amount of input done, right? So it's kind of like a yield factor of like the effort I had to put into something.
Sure, and I feel like I'm channeling my grandfather today because I'm gonna make a Great Depression reference.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like a Dust Bowl reference. It's not just about yield, right? So you just don't want to maximize the yield because you may destroy the field in doing so, right?
Yeah.
So it's making best use of all the resources that you have at your disposal.
I love it. I love that's a really good Dust
I
Bowl.
promise I did not read East of Eden last night or anything like that. I just happened to have it on the top of my tongue.
So that's all right. Dude, by the way, I love like references from like olden times. Anybody who's ever talked to me, and I've mentioned it a few different times on this show and others, is that I love talking to people from, the old days, if you will, like old, more senior folks. Let's call that. And let's not call them the elderly, because like they lived in eras that you can't even imagine. Like my great grandmother, who I was lucky enough to know, she remembered the first time she ever saw a car. Like,
Yeah,
like what? That's
yeah.
like I've never known a world without the car, right? And then this lady got to fly in airplanes and see a man land on the moon and all that type of stuff. So it's always interesting to think about those types of deals. But yeah, the Dust Bowl reference is fantastic. I love
Thank you, thank you.
it. Good stuff. So if you don't know what the Dust Bowl is, by the way, go Google it and learn a little bit about how big of a
Yeah,
deal it was to our country, to the
yeah.
point
So,
of like
so if
the
you're a young one, take your dad's phone and show them how to Google it. Yeah.
you can learn a lot about the world from listening to folks who've gone before you. Um, so listen, it's funny. Like one of the things I want to talk about is bottlenecks here, because I think you hit on a couple of them. But problems aren't always easy to see until they become a crisis. I mean, even that Dust Bowl thing, right? Like people didn't realize it until it actually started happening. You're like, oh my God, this is a problem. And then once it was happening, it was a big problem, right? So I guess that's kind of human nature. But I imagine there are some symptoms that might present themselves to an RAA that
Sure.
they could spot early, so they can start getting out ahead of them, so they don't become really productivity crises or problems that are just like stopping their growth, and now they're stuck, or causing them to lose clients because they're not getting back at it, whatever that is. What should an RAA do, what should the team be doing to be on the lookout for, I guess is the right way to say
Well,
it.
well, Mike, we've identified 82 specific red flags, and I'm going to walk you down through each of them. Just kidding.
Hey.
Just kidding. I'll give you four. I'll give you four that I think are really important. Think about all the systems, and as you're working through your processes, is there ever a time you're rekeying data from a paper into a system, or
Mm,
rekeying it from system to system, right? So, like
right.
today, I was rekeying something from a PDF and rekeying it into a spreadsheet. That's an inefficient system. That's a red flag. Another one would be lack of knowledge of a system. So, say you were working with a client, and a client calls you up and says, "Hey, what's the status of that application I sent you yesterday?" If you don't know that, that's another red flag, right? So you want to be able to have knowledge of where things stand within the system. A third one would be, do you struggle to fill? Do you have an open position, like an employee position that you haven't been able to fill? That's one, going back to the employee experience. You ask yourself, well, why can't you attract that talent in that position? This is a growing field, lots of greenfield in front of us. Why would you not be able to attract top talent at your firm? And then the last one is, and this is really for advisors when they're beginning a new relationship, is, do you ever find yourself overly describing or defending why a process or experience isn't the way you want it to be, right?
Mm.
So if you're talking with the client and say, well, this is going to be painful, or this is going to take a long time, but here's why it's important, that should be another red flag too, because it doesn't have to be.
I love all of those. Those are fantastic. The first one really hit home for me, by the way. The whole like if you're rekeying data, like the information from one place to another, especially when it's digital, that just drives me absolutely bonkers. It's like this stuff's already on my screen. Why do I have to copy it from there to there and do like the windows?
So
So
in a previous life, this person did multiple things at the job. I don't want to make them sound like they weren't an effective employee, but we had one employee who would receive a data file from one system. They'd move column J into make it column A, and then put it into another system. They did nothing with the data. They did not manipulate the data, analyze the data, do anything. All they did was
yeah,
receive the file, move column J to A, and then put it back into another system. That's not efficient, right? That's not
right.
effective.
That's amazing. It is true. So it's a huge waste of time. It opens you up for human error, because that is anytime a human gets in there, there's a potential for mistake. Uh, other, it slows them down from doing other things they could do. And to the point of like, integrated with that other talent thing you mentioned, like, if you're having trouble attracting or filling a job, heck, anytime a person has to do like mundane stuff that after a while could just drive you nuts, well, now that person's at risk of leaving, frankly, for a place that
Sure.
is a little more put together, or they're just, I mean, look, anytime we've all changed jobs or made career changes in our lives. You think back on it, sometimes it's more for more money, sometimes it's because the boss is a jerk or whatever, or the commute or whatever. But oftentimes it's because you've just plateaued or you feel like you're unfulfilled at work and doing like just the same mundane stuff that maybe could be automated or whatever. But we all get there at some point in time. One of the reasons why you choose to leave is like you're just unfulfilled with the work.
Yeah, because it's not, you're exactly right. And I hear this a lot because it's not just exactly that you don't like the things you're doing, but it's that you don't get to do the things that you
Yeah.
want to do because
Right.
you're held back by the things that you're doing. And I think that's a key point.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, you know, one of the things that just, brings to mind is like integrations, right? Earlier this year, I think it was in February, you wrote a blog post titled Why Integrations Are Essential to the Modern Financial Advisory Firm, which, by the way, is really important for us here. But the whole podcast is named Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. So, as you might imagine, that caught my eye. So, I wonder if you might break this concept of integration down a bit for us so it's a little easier to understand.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say thank you. And now I know I have two readers of my blogs. I have my mother and Mike. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
That's
Two's
right.
good.
I'm sure your mom is equally amazing to be around.
She is. She's a lovely woman. But so integrations are a huge conundrum for technology because they connect systems that weren't built or weren't created to connect with each other, right? So imagine if you were to go to New York City, go to Midtown, and say, I am going to figure out how to get 20th floor bridges connected all these different buildings. Because again, some were connected 20 years ago, some were connected 10 years ago, some connected or were built 100 years ago. And so it's a key challenge. There's also the challenge of there isn't a universal integration standard within the technology
Mm,
industry that we're probably missing. We probably need it. Smarter people than me will need to be able to create it. But I think there isn't a standard. So what happens is a lot of technologies share little bits of information, a little other things, but it's that we can admit that there's no system that exists completely in isolation. That's just not
mm,
how things work these days, as I mentioned before. And so it's the only way that a technology can really deliver on the promise that it made to the buyer when they bought the technology is to integrate and integrate well. And I think there's a couple of things that come up that happen that I think is a challenge is people will say, well, the systems need to talk to each other.
right.
And I think that that's fundamentally incorrect. I have been in some terrible relationships in my life where all we did was talk to each other. What they need to do is communicate with each other in order to be, and that's where the heart of a good integration would be.
I like it. I like it. It is. I love the fact you communicate versus talk to each other. That is a. It sounds like it's a small difference, but no, it's not. Right? Communication means understanding. Right? It's like it really. It's a very important distinction there. And we all have systems where you just can't believe this system doesn't talk to the other system, doesn't communicate with the other system. Like why? Why am I not able to just pull information directly into this other thing? I love it.
Yeah, so in Docupace, so going on the integration point, integrations help us have very clear sort of drawn lines about who we are and what we want to be, and more importantly, what we don't. So, for instance, we don't want to be a CRM. So, put the CRM at sort of start of a process. We don't want to be financial planning software. Put that, as a side as
Mhm.
that we integrate with. And then we also don't want to be like InvestNet. We don't want to be like a TAMP portfolio trading. That's sort of system. Put that on another side. And then we also don't want to be a custodian. We want to integrate. We want to work with them. So, Docubase, if you think of that, sort of sits in the center, right? And so we know where we want to be, where we don't want to be, but also that all the data can flow in amongst those systems through our system and flow freely and bidirectionally.
That makes a lot of sense. It's you know y- anybody who's use some productivity hacks, if you will, solutions on the web. There's like Zapier for some of your stuff like that's on your web for like social media and all that type of stuff. And then there's some other like uh, if this and that then, or
Mhm.
IFTT or something like that. Like there's some of those solutions that you may be already using on your like your personal side. This is for your business, right? In many ways.
Absolutely. So Zapier is a good technology. What I'll say about Zapier is um, the full customization nature of Zapier can sometimes limit what it can do because you have to go build on yourself. Versus,
Right.
for instance, when we built the RA productivity suite, we came up with three standard out of the box workflows: one for sort of a small RAA,
Yep.
one for sort of middle sized RA, and then for like a large RA. And those are already ready to go whenever the technology is deployed.
That's a fantastic point to make. Like, look, you can cobble together a bunch of solutions on your own. You probably can try to tinker with some things. Somebody's built it and they built it purposefully. And this is an industry where specifically because you're dealing with people's money and your business is really important. You want to make sure you use a purpose-built solution for it. Don't try to cobble together your own stuff. This is not a time to roll your own, dude.
Well,
Guys.
but again, that goes back to what you mentioned before, which is you've got so many hats to wear. Is that really
Yeah,
the hat? Is that a hat you want to wear yourself?
that's right. That's right. Um, I know we've covered a lot of ground about the firm and so forth, and the things that you're doing and value you're bringing for advisors. One thing that you mentioned in our prep call that I didn't know, so I was super thrilled that you mentioned it, that you had acquired Precise FP. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about that. What is Precise FP for those who don't know, and why did it make sense for Docupace?
So Precise MP is an amazing software for its simplicity. So what Precise MP does is it's a digital client data gathering solution
Hmm.
where an advisor, it does many things, but I'll just baseline it, can send a link to a client. The client can then click on the link, fill in all their information. Whether it's a typical financial plan requires say 50 or so different points of information,
Yeah.
including PII as well as other like occupation and other things. It actually they can take it and then send it to all everywhere it needs to go. It needs to go into to an application system in order to facilitate the opening of an account, or to say a financial planning software in order to facilitate the creation of the financial plan, or into the CRM to facilitate the sort of the creation of that client
Mm,
profile within the CRM. And what it does is just makes that process, which can be laborious and can be very time heavy, as quick as possible. And so that's what a
yeah.
lot of advisors have used it for: is how can you easily and securely capture information from your client in a manner that is not obtrusive, that's quick for them to do, and they can move on to do their next thing.
I love it. I love it. I had had a dream of that years ago of like, wouldn't it be nice to meet somebody and after a while they're like, yeah, I'd love to do business with you. I'd love to, I'm in the need for a new financial advisor to be able to basically, I'm sending you a link right now.
Yeah,
Let's
and
get the ball rolling.
that's one I would say sort of the historical use case for what's really been interesting. So I have been involved with the company now, so we acquired them back in September 2021. With the pandemic, their usage, of course, spiked, right?
Yeah.
Because advisors weren't allowed to, and so as these advisors, the larger set of advisors have been using it, they've now moved on to this sort of creation level
Yeah.
of okay, knowing that they can have this technology and what's the different applications they can use it across their business, and that's been a cool thing to watch and encourage, and document as we've gone.
I love it. I love it. It's fantastic stuff. So useful. And I love that, once that's working, DocuPace is when you guys can pick up from there. Um, Getting ready to close it out here, or like turning third, heading for home, if you will. One of the things I'd like to do before I have anybody come on the show is I poke around on the website, not social and so forth, try to learn a little bit of something about them, and maybe find something that we didn't talk about in the prep call, and I hadn't thought about before. But on your website, docupace.com, and be linked up in the show notes, I came across a page for National Back Office Heroes Day.
That's
And it
right.
put a huge smile on my face just because I've been in the business where, we were back office, right? So one of my early jobs was working for State Street Corporation. They are all about like,
Yep.
they do things behind the scenes. They're not customer facing. InvestNet is behind the scenes, right? Your
Yep.
your financial advisor client has no idea who InvestNet is. Type of thing. I love that type of stuff. So tell me about
So
this. How did this come about?
So, did you know there's all sorts of national holidays? There's a National Bean Throwing Day. There's a National like Sock Monkey Day. One of my favorites is there's even a National Lumpy Rug Day. which is great. Don't know what lumpy rug means, but hey, great, they have their day. So similar to you, I grew up working in a transfer agency. So it's one of my first job in the business. And I've always had appreciation for the people behind the scenes, behind the curtain, that actually make this business run. And when I got to Docupace, that was that is our client. There's our main user. Those are our main buyer. That's where we impact and where we have our impact. And I've always thought that, well, these people don't get their due. They don't get the celebration of the hard work they're doing. People know it. They know that they're being impactful, but they're not called out like the salespeople, and they're not called out like the marketing people. We get all the attention we need. We don't need it anymore. So I wanted to create a day that really celebrates all the work they do. And we picked April 27th because it's a national holiday each year, because it comes after tax season, which is like something like 70% of all applications come during that first 4 months of the year. And that's why we focused it there.
That's great.
And what's been great is what it gives us an opportunity to do is we give 3 awards that are along with Back Office Heroes Day. So we have a Back Office Hero Award. So that's anybody in our central IBD office that's in the back office that we take nominations from our clients and we can award them. There's also a field user, so like a wealth management assistant or an operation person who works at actual wealth management firm, and then there's an employee team member, a Docupace Back Office Hero. We give those 3 awards out each year, and we're excited to do so.
That is fantastic. It's fantastic. Everybody needs their flowers sometimes. Let people know you're very thankful that they're there and doing the job. So, by the way, advisors who are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, mark it on your calendar, April 27th. Let the back office folks in your life know you appreciate them, because, dude, they're doing a lot of work and they make you look like a rock star.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, last thing, and I've been asking this question pretty frequently for people recently, because I just like to see if I can spot some trends here. What is something that you're watching with great interest in the industry, right? Or what do you see maybe bubbling up that you're keeping an eye on? What are your thoughts?
So quickly, I think AI is interesting and terrifying all at once. I think things are moving so fast, and you've got 2 camps. You've got the early adopters who will just put it into everything without even wondering what the downside may be. And then you've got the people that are terrified hiding under the kitchen table because they think it's the robots are coming. And those are 2 far camps, but it's just it's thing. The other thing I think is interesting is we're at the sort of burgeoning days of a custodial war between who's going to win where the assets are going, with the Schwab TDA merger coming in, Labor Day of this year. That's forced, so it's sort of like been stepping on an ant pile, or say 2 large ant piles, to see where the advisor assets will go, and I think that's big. But the biggest thing that interests me the most, you probably haven't heard this, is we're messing this up. And when I say we're messing this up, is this business is at an opportunity point that we'll have never seen before, and will likely never see again. There's this great wealth transfer. We have however many trillions of dollars you want to talk, I see different figures. There's this largest growing number of investors, people interested in investing. There's more diverse client bases, both culturally, ethnically, but yet I've still not seen the business modify itself to really address these opportunities that are right in front of them. They're still doing the paper processes. We're still following sort of old hats of even client acquisition or client service, when it's a whole new paradigm, and that those who can get there first are going to be the modern financial advisor. Those who are going to get there first are going to reap great rewards if they can actually get their firm to take action yesterday, not tomorrow.
I love it. No, it's true. There's a huge amount of opportunity there to seize and make it easy, right? Making client acquisition easier, making it onboarding easier, making servicing easier, right? It's great.
The need for financial advice has never been greater. Go get it.
Love it. Well, that's a fantastic way to end. Ryan George, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for coming on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. We'll make sure all of your stuff is linked up in the show notes. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always great to have you with us. Huge thanks to Ryan George from Docupace for coming on the show. I absolutely love how he broke down the simple ways you can diagnose potential productivity issues. I'm going to be using some of those in my business for sure. All right. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. And if you haven't done so already, give the episode a share on LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you hang out online. Chances are, if you found it interesting, so will your network. Okay, that's it for today. As always, be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. See ya. Bye.